Thank you very much. Thanks, Avi, for the introduction. Thanks to my colleague across the border, Jeff Tingley, and the team at Rhode Island Commerce Corp for our continued work together. And a huge thanks to the Venture Cafe and the UMass Ocean initiative here for today's supply chain. Yeah, so this is going to be great. This is a really good panel we have, and I think we're going to advance the conversation that's sort of made the arc today, picking up from the great sort of startup panel and the European experience. There's a lot of colleagues I see on today's forum, so it's really great to be here. I'll tee this up a little bit, and then we'll jump in and ask each of our panelists to provide a few minutes of introduction, and then we're going to start grilling them with questions. So, you know, I think it goes without saying the U.S. offshore wind industry represents really a significant economic opportunity. Folks are familiar with the studies, in particular the Special Initiative for Offshore Wind, looking at essentially a $70 billion supply chain opportunity. And if anything, that report now, maybe a year and a half old, you know, colleagues are sort of saying that's not like a $100 billion number. And this is sort of what we were just getting at. The first projects are going to be largely importing the majority of the infrastructure, the components, and much of it, including you know, installation vessels, support vessels, and we are looking forward to ramping up the U.S. Supply chain here. But even in those first projects, there's going to be a tremendous opportunity for supply chain and workforce, local and regional. So we're going to sort of tease that out a little bit. And then we're going to obviously look to, you know, with 28 to 30 gigawatts sort of teed up here in the U.S., we're going to start to look at, as Jeff was just getting at, you know, what does it look like in 5-10 years? And we've got this esteemed panel here. They're going to really help us along the way. A few things I want to sort of just mention at the outset, along with, you know, what Stephen Pryor sort of introduced for your efforts in Rhode Island, the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center and our colleagues in Massachusetts have also, alongside Rhode Island, been first movers in offshore wind, and we continue to make investments in ports and infrastructure and workforce and supply chain. And we're really looking forward to continuing to advance the industry for Massachusetts, for the region, and for the U.S. So we're on this great journey, and thank you all for joining us. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda first. She can do an introduction, and then we'll take it from there. So Amanda.
Hi, thank you so much, Bruce, and thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be part of this panel. So I'm Amanda Schoen. I head up U.S. Public Affairs, Trade Policy, and Regulatory Affairs for MHI Vestas Offshore Wind. We're one of the world's leading turbine manufacturers, and what sets us apart is that we are strictly and solely focused on offshore wind. Onshore wind is a whole other ball game. We're a joint venture between Mitsubishi Heavy Industries and Vestas. And so both of our parent companies have pretty robust and established footprints in the US already. MHI has about 7,000 employees, 100 offices and factories across 30 states, and Vestas has about 6,000 employees and 4 factories in the US, mostly centered in Colorado. Our team at MHI Vestas is a little bit smaller, but has been expanding rapidly. We've got leaders in kind of all of the key office areas, including global supply chain management, and we've been really focused on how we build out this supply chain for this emerging industry. So thank you again, and I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. Thank you, Amanda. I am going next to Bill.
Hello, this is Bill Wall at LS Cable Systems America. I'm not sure my video is working correctly.
Bill, that's okay. We don't have video, but certainly we can hear you right now. So why don't you go
Okay, yeah, the video says it's on, but I can't see anything. Anyway, I'm a project director with LS Cable America. LS Cable is a Korean-based cable manufacturer, and we manufacture and install submarine cable for the offshore wind industry and the general utility industry here in the US. We're worldwide, but my area of focus is the US. I've been involved with offshore wind quite a while, since 2007. And as Drew Carey said earlier, a lot of the companies were very small. I like Drew's remark about Deepwater Wind being a small startup with only three people. I was lucky enough to be one of those three people and worked very closely with Drew over the years. So looking forward to your questions, Bruce.
Excellent. Thank you, Bill. Tony, would you mind going next?
No problem. Good morning, everyone. It's just about still morning over there. Thanks, Avi and Bruce, for the introductions, and thank you to the teams at Ocean and Venture Cafe, sorry, for organising this event and inviting me on the panel today. So, as Bruce said, my name is Tony Appleton. I'm Director of Offshore Wind at Burns McDonnell. I've been in the power sector for about 25 years, with about 15 years experience in the offshore wind sector. I've been involved in about 30 offshore wind projects in Europe and the US, undertaking a range of activities from front-end viability and feasibility all the way through to operation and management. This works, I guess it's enabled me to develop a really deep understanding of the supply chain requirements of an offshore wind farm, and of how the local, national, international supply chain partners need to work together to ensure that the project is successful. A key part of the supply chain and its development is the role of the regional development agencies, the trade associations, supply chain networks, and other stakeholders local to the offshore project. And as such, I've worked with a number of these organizations, both in the UK and the USA, basically to try to ensure that the sector, the projects and the supply chain, particularly the local supply chain, are sustainable long-term. One thing I just thought I'd mention is, and Mark O'Reilly will be pleased about this, I've been working with Team Humber Marine Alliance for about 10 years, developing the supply chain in and around the Humber region in the UK. This project and the work done in Hull is widely acknowledged as the market leader in the sector. And as such, we've hosted delegations from probably every state that's now involved in offshore wind in the US. So I think it's you know, there is a great deal still to learn from the UK. So just very quickly about Burns & McDonnell. We were established in 1898. We are an American company. We are headquartered in Kansas City. We are a fully integrated employee-owned engineering, environmental and consulting firm. We've got something like 7,500 to 8,000 professionals and over 50 offices, with revenues in excess of about $3 billion US. We are rated in the US as #1 in the power sector and in the transmission distribution sector, and we're in the top 10 design firms in the US. We plan, design, permit, construct and manage facilities undertaking anything from a small study to full EPC of major projects, working in virtually every sector from airports to buildings to offshore wind. So within the offshore wind sector, more specifically, we undertake a range of activities primarily focused on the onshore work. So this is things like the substations, the cables, the overhead lines, but we also do regulatory support, transmission assessments, a big discussion point in the US market at the minute, and we do other things like environmental support as well, through high-level design to detailed design and onto construction. We can also EPC the work. We do owners engineer activities. We do a program and project management. We are now starting to get our feet wet. Traditionally, Burns & McDonnell has just been operating on the dry side of an offshore wind project, but we now are undertaking offshore cable activities, particularly the export and array cables, as well as looking at the topside design and the complete electrical system design. So we are fairly well integrated into the US offshore wind market. Thanks, Bruce.
Great, thank you, Tony, very much. And Scott, bring us on home with the introductions. Oh, Scott, for some reason, I think we're not hearing you. Try again, Scott. No, we're having audio. Is there some master control? This is where things go a little awry.
It happens.
Yeah.
Scott, one quick thing, and we can also chat offline as we can also move to someone else. But check your arrow next to your little microphone button on the lower left-hand side, and just make sure that your microphone is tuned into the correct microphone, and your speaker is on the correct speaker. And if that doesn't work, I will privately chat you, and you can call me, and we can work something out.
Scott, give us a shot here. That's mute, and now unmute. No, we're having troubles with Scott. So Avi, we're gonna send in the Geek Squad and support Scott and get him hooked up. And just to keep the flow going, I'm gonna jump to the other panelists. And Scott, don't worry, we're gonna get you in. We're gonna get you plugged in and involved here. So my first question is really sort of picked up where Jeff left off. We are all looking forward to that point where the offshore wind industry in the U.S. is, mature, where we are fabricating, manufacturing, producing all of the components and balance of plant. We've got all of the necessary supply chain and vessels and installation right on down the tiers of the supply chain, and it's cranking like a well-oiled machine. That's some time off, right? But why don't each of you guys just give me a little perspective on sort of how we get there, the timing, the first movers, and just give us a little that sort of vision, and then we're gonna back up and fill in between now and then. So Tony, why don't I start with you, then we'll go to Amanda and Bill.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. Yeah, I think one of the ways that the US market needs to move forward is start thinking about grouping or clustering. This is one thing we've been talking about in the UK is the past couple of years is clustering. And that can either be by region or by opportunity type, as it were. So you could get a number of electrical engineering companies working together across the eastern seaboard, for example, or you could get a cluster, around Rhode Island and Massachusetts, picking two states. I think what the US market has got to realize that every state is not going to get a manufacturing facility. It's not going to get a blade factory. It's not going to get a tower manufacturer. So I think what the states have got to start to do is work together to work out which area is best suited for what type of supply they want to be part of. What part of the supply chain do they want to be involved with? Some states are looking at operation maintenance. That's great. So I think there's a number of activities that need to happen to start to pull that the supply chain together in a coordinated way. At the minute, it is a bit fragmented, with each state kind of competing with each other, and I think that needs to change, and more cooperation is required. It's in simple terms.
Excellent. Amanda, you want to have a go? So what does this look like when we are cranking? How are we quickly getting there?
Absolutely. So Tony said it really well. We really need to take a regional look at the whole supply chain. Not every state is going to have the entire supply chain, and so it's getting to that point where states really need to identify what is it that they do really well. And I think that this particular, we see the Northeast being the first mover with the first offtake agreements and such, and we have this familiarity here with aerospace manufacturing, with the marine trades manufacturing, and this process has happened kind of organically, but we can take those lessons learned from the other industries to identify, well, where are the opportunities? Which state does training really, really well and is going to, capitalize on that. Where are there existing like components that might be able to be translated from a marine industry into the offshore wind industry, or aerospace into the offshore wind? So as states start to take a look at what their resources are and sort of what they do best, I think you'll start seeing that drive it. But I think this is also an opportunity for the supply chain to do a bottom-up approach and start saying what they do really, really well, and what piece of the pie they want to most, go after and prioritize. So the more we can do that as a region and not have the states necessarily competing for everything all at once, I think you'll see a more robust and established supply chain forming.
Great. Thanks, Amanda. And there's a few threads here that we'll pick up on as we advance this discussion. I'm seeing that Scott may have his audio back restored. Scott, is that true?
Yeah, hoping you can hear me now.
We can hear you now. So Scott, why don't we allow you to do your intro, and then we'll pick back up with that last thread.
Yeah, so sorry about that. There's always one in the bunch, I guess. So
no worries.
So my name's Scott Viciana. I am Vice President of our business development and all of our sales at Ventower Industries. Ventower is primarily a utility scale wind turbine tower manufacturer established here in Michigan. We've been really kind of one of a very small handful of companies in all of North America that really focuses on utility scale towers. We're providing turnkey solutions. So everything from procurement, managing supply chain, cutting, rolling, welding, painting, assembling, and sending finished product to project sites. So my piece here and our expertise, where we've been making towers really for upwards of 10 years now, is our appetite and want to expand to the East Coast. We've been really neck deep in the opportunities, not only on the tower side, but also some of the secondary steel and heavy steel fabrication opportunities that some potential collaboration could be seen from some of the European companies looking to enter the market here, and really trying to bring heavy steel fabrication, which is a key component, whether it be towers or transition pieces or secondary steel, really to the East Coast, and ultimately as a vital location, having immediate water access, particularly as sizes of towers and monopiles, transition pieces are all headed towards 8-meter diameter and above. So we have been very, very committed to this expansion. Currently have not landed anywhere yet. I've spent a lot of time in the Northeast and your neck of the woods, Bruce and others on the line, and I'm sure folks on the line have been keeping tabs on us a bit. I think we're at an interesting spot now where things are starting to move. I heard one of the gentlemen talk earlier about contracts being awarded and projects starting to move. I agree that the COVID situation and some permitting situations will slow things a bit, but from our perspective, we are seeing the industry moving full steam ahead in order to try to not only develop, I would call it tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers, but also tier 1 suppliers, and committed to making some of the key components for offshore wind here in the US sooner than later. So thanks for having me jump back in here, and certainly open to questions you may have.
Yeah, that's great. And your introduction sort of picked up on that initial question too. So I appreciate that, and your the views from someone eager and interested and highly qualified to get into the market here. So Bill, any quick thoughts? I want to keep this moving, but I do want to sort of, I look forward to sort of hearing, about this mature market view, the timing, the first movers, any sort of quick insights, and then I've got some follow-ups for everybody.
Yeah, I think the quick insights are that the previous two speakers on this hit it, that eventually there should be regionalization, but I think the initial larger utility scale projects, especially when responding to a state PPA or a state offtake agreement, will tend to try to keep everything within that state. A lot of people think that's unfortunate, but I think the first 2 or 3 utility scale projects will try to do that. You see from the recent news from New Jersey that a large wind port is going to be planned, paid for by the state in South Jersey. Obviously, then New Jersey, for one state, will try to attract manufacturers and service companies to that port. So that's my lookout for the next 3 to 5 years. Beyond that, 10 years, then you might see a little more regional effort for the supply chain.
Okay, great. And that was actually an excellent transition, Bill, because as I sort of said in my introduction, we won't be producing components, probably in the next 3, maybe even 5 years, ideally in 3 or 5 years, we have the first few plants and the toeholds, and we're starting to ramp up. But as was mentioned before, there is a number of projects, especially up here in southern New England in our areas, with projects procured by Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New York, that are slated to come online, in the middle to later part of the 2020s. So for those first projects where we are importing components, some of the wind turbine, most of the wind turbine components coming to a marshaling or a construction baseport, and potentially, some of the foundations and other going directly to the wind farm site. Talk to us about not the tier 1, tier 2s, but the tier 3, 4, 5s. What are some of those opportunities? And I'm going to get into this a little bit more. What are those opportunities? What advice do you have for those type of companies looking to get into this space for their participation? Let me see here. I'm going to go to Amanda on this.
Yeah, so it really varies depending on component. I mean, for companies that are interested in getting involved, there's certification processes for sure to meet global standards for offshore wind. So companies that are interested, if they haven't yet started pursuing those types of certifications, now is the time, because it can be a lengthy process. There's also ways to get involved a little bit more proactively. I mean, we've kind of glossed over a little bit some of the permitting challenges that are still going on, but obviously, Vineyard being the first project to go online, BOEM just released their revised environmental impact statement. So supply chain companies that want to see this industry move forward, can submit public comments to advance that. It's certainly something that would get the attention of the industry. It's a little bit more outside the box. But it's also, it's starting to reach out and have the conversations. And I know that our head of supply chain, is often on the phone and in Zoom meetings nowadays with various tier 2, tier 3, and so on sub-suppliers about what they can offer, where they're currently located. We're looking for synergies between European companies and American companies. And also, I mean, we're a little bit unique in that we have some parent companies who have footprints in the US as well. We're trying to see if there's any synergies there. So, there's a lot of different avenues to pursue, but I would certainly encourage folks to start seeing what sort of certifications they would need and starting that process sooner rather than later.
Okay, great. I'm probably going to follow up on a few of those threads as well. Scott, any advice for folks looking to support tower or secondary steel manufacturing?
Well, I think there's absolutely going to be a need for, I'm going to call it finishing some of the and final assembly of components as they arrive here in the U.S. coming from Europe or other locations, especially on some of these earlier projects. I agree with kind of what Bill was saying there. Going forward, there are situations within our scope where an existing facility, it would only be logical to start developing the local supply chain and starting at the bottom. And I can't stress enough how important some of these bottom item things may seem, like consumables, paint, bolts. All those things that kind of seem to be overlooked are critical and used by the thousands within our operation every day. So building from some of the local companies that can already do this and are providing materials or providing services to, I would call it, like industries and manufacturing companies, to me could fold in very nicely. There are certain material requirements and specification requirements on some of the components that have structural properties or electrical properties. No, there's no doubt about that. But those are things that we can support, and if a company is interested and committed, and we can vet them underneath our customers' requirements. These are things we've done and can translate from similarly to from onshore to offshore, doing today in our region in the Michigan, with local companies, and ideally could replicate that to some extent on the East Coast too.
Great, much appreciated. So Tony, let me sort of broaden this. So we were just sort of talking with an OEM and a tier one, but from the sort of EPC or engineering consulting view, I'd imagine there's just the realm may be even greater here, the opportunities, and not just for you guys, Burns and McDonnell, but for potential subs or for your colleagues and competitors.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, what we do at the minute on an offshore wind farm, it's kind of business as usual. The supply chain exists already because we build substations in the US. What people have got to remember is when you're looking at the supply chain for an offshore wind farm, everybody kind of focuses on the turbines or the towers or the cabling. But actually, a big part of the project, obviously, as well, is the onshore aspects, and that really hasn't changed. The components that are used are the components that have been used on substations and overhead lines and underground cables and things like that for many, many years. And that supply chain already exists. And what this is an opportunity for that supply chain to grow and develop. And yes, there are more and more projects coming online. So, in terms of from an engineering opportunity, a consulting opportunity, it's a fairly big pie we're going after here. If you look at the range of projects and the range of locations, and each project as well, is going to be slightly different because you've got different partners coming together. So you've got a developer and a utility coming together in one state. That now might be the same developer and utility in a different state, but because it's a different state, the project will be different because each state is putting its own constraints on it. So each project is effectively a one-off to a certain extent. So from that point of view, that makes it very interesting from an engineering and consulting perspective. But again, just before I hand over, Bruce, the other thing to think about in terms of going forward over the next few years, yes, the first round of projects are probably going to be the big components, particularly the offshore components, are probably going to be European or Asian. But one thing that the US supply chain can gear itself up for and needs to be doing that now is actually the operation and maintenance, because that has to be local. That has to come out of the local port. You can't operate and maintain a wind farm in off the coast of Virginia, if the the operation and maintenance base is in Denmark, it can't happen. It's not going to happen. So the supply, that local supply chain can start to develop now from an operation and maintenance point of view, and that be that the vessels or be that all the various smaller components and engineering that's required to support the operation and maintenance of an offshore wind farm. And what you've got to remember as well is the operation and maintenance of an offshore wind farm lasts for 40 years, 25 to 40 years. So it's actually it's almost to a certain extent, it's the big ticket item because it goes on for so long. So
appreciate that, Tony. So Bill, so continuing on this thread, from LS Cable, talk a little bit about sort of what sort of tier 2s and tier 3s and possibly 4s you guys might need, in a scope for a commercial scale offshore wind project.
Okay, basically, we would require, well, it really depends on whether we are doing a supply only or a supply and install or EPC contract. If we were doing an EPC contract, which is supplying the cable and installing, we would need installation subcontractors, survey companies, small crew boat vessels for coming out to the project site if we were laying an export cable, for instance. But I think one message that I've always said to tier 3, 4, 5 companies in the industry is, if you're just getting started, try to find out quickly where you fit in. A lot of the companies try to contact, say, the larger developers, but the larger developer on a utility scale project may only have 4 or 5 contracts in a multi-contract scheme, where that developer is contracting with a turbine manufacturer, a cable supplier, a foundation supplier, for example. So the smaller companies need to find out quickly where they fit in and then basically attack that area where they fit in rather than lobbying the larger developers all the time. And we manufacture at the moment in Korea, and we ship our cable over to either the East Coast or the West Coast of the US, and then usually transfer in a suitable port to a installation vessel. One of the areas that hasn't really been optimized in the submarine cable industry is storage. Submarine cable is usually a just-in-time industry, i.e. just in time we ship from Korea and we have the freighter and the installation vessel meet up in the port and do a transfer. That may not fit the logistics of a certain project, and we may have to ship that cable to a port and store that cable for 6 months until the project is ready to accept that cable. Storage like that is basically non-existent at the moment on the US East Coast. I've talked to a couple of smaller contractors and port operators about possible storage, but I think that's one area that will start to be required much more in the next 10 years.
Great, Bill. Appreciate that. You covered a lot of sort of multiple responses to that question, and I am not going to take us down the ports path. That's a whole topic for a whole nother day. But sticking on supply chain, and this is a follow-up really for Amanda, because this is something that you touched on. And I sort of want to just chase this a little bit. I know MHI Vestas Offshore, you guys have pretty rigorous, pre-qualification and vetting And included in that are, things like you mentioned some of the, standards specific to certain sectors. But I think the other thing that if you could touch on is, you and others place a premium on health and safety, and that passes down through your contractors and your subs. So just talk a little bit more about sort of the pre-qualification process and how that might work here.
Sure. So yes, we do place a very strong emphasis on health and safety, and we really pride ourselves on taking that seriously. So we adhere to the global wind standards, global offshore wind standards, GWO training, which kind of all of our workers who are going to be going out on the boats or servicing, doing installation or maintenance have to follow. And to that extent, there's already GWO training. I believe it's been going on in the US. There's been a few different folks who have, or there's Mass Maritime, for instance, I believe is doing training programs. I know there's programs in Rhode Island as well that have been starting this, and they're working with these accredited programs to make sure that they are getting workers up to speed already. So they see that as an emerging market. And, I do encourage folks to reach out to those entities, again, making sure that it does adhere to those GWO standards. If there's any questions about it, certainly those can be raised to us or to the programs themselves. And then we also have our own specific training as well. And that's kind of proprietary to our equipment. That is the sort of programs they'll be getting off the ground once we're a little bit closer to ramping up installation or maintenance operations. But doing the first leg of the work ahead of time, that gives you a leg up.
So what I'd like to do is ask one more question and then take a few questions from the chat and others. So, and each of you, I think, or this came up, not all of you, but, this topic, which is local content in the offshore wind procurement process. Sort of pros, cons. Some obviously argue the intent, the goal is to obviously generate local jobs, create local economic development. I think everybody sort of views that as being positive, at least for the state or the port or ports or area. The flip side is, from a sort of market development perspective, we've heard views about trying to force things, and I'm interested very quickly if you guys could each sort of touch on your views on local content requirements.
Sorry, Bruce. Yeah. From my point of view, supply chain, local content, local supply chain is important. That's going to help to get the message across that offshore. Part of the message across that offshore wind is good. It's going to create jobs. It's going to create wealth. Local content is going to drive local investment, regional investment, national, international investment. That's all going to help the local community. But there is a big caveat there. The local content must be cost effective. If it's not cost effective, there's no point doing it, because the big companies like Vestas, like MHI Vestas, like Siemens, or any of the big companies coming over from Europe, they're not going to buy locally if it's more expensive to do so. What I'm seeing in the industry at the minute is there are a number of discussions taking place between the European supply chain and the American supply chain, trying to pull the two of them together. And there's almost a different way of working. The European way is and I'll coin this, I'll use the terminology and shoot me down. The European is very transactional. The US is very relationship based. And there is a difference between the two. So when a European comes over and asks a question, they may not be asking the right question, and two, the American may not understand what the actual question is. And then, because they don't fully understand the question, they're then putting concerned about the risk element. And if you're putting risk into it, you're going to put the price up. So there has to be more dialogue. There has to be an education of both parties, how both parties work, for the supply chain to develop and move forward.
Great. So real quick, I'm going to jump to Scott. Your views on
So sorry you were cutting out there a little bit, Bruce, but I'll be quick. So if you can hear me, the local content, it's clearly baked into so much of this industry expansion. We see it as very important, the content part of it. We also have an interesting perspective being in the industry and supplying not only domestically but foreign export projects as well. So in the end, I'll fast forward to, in the end, towers made along the East Coast are going to have to be competitive globally, and at some point there is going to be and has to be a cut in, whether from established supply chain shipping to the U.S. and then ultimately cutting in that supply chain that's cost effective and can work with customers, developers, OEMs, economic development folks, and ultimately utilities on cost out initiatives and things like that. So, ultimately that it's got to start somewhere. I think it's getting close, and crawling before we walk is going to be certainly, going to be the mantra, I think, as some of the, I would say some of the key components and the manufacturing locations and CapEx investments are being made. Local content is going to be critical, but seeing the big picture and being able to support the industry long term, I think is really vital.
Excellent. So in the interest of time here, I'm going to pivot to Tuni, who indicated that she had a question that came out of the chat that she wanted to raise, and I will use that as my exit out of this most excellent panel. I could keep going on this for hours, but obviously we have to get to our partners on the developer side. So Tuni?
Thank you so much, Bruce. You did a great job in this discussion. As you just said, is so engaging. I am getting questions from some that want to remain anonymous. So I will probably, I have one for the next panel as well. Submerged cables were identified as the major source of risk to these offshore wind developments. Can any of you identify what you think the U.S. can do to lower this risk, or give guidance on where you might see progress being made? Are there opportunities that no one has time to work on, or you don't have time to work on, that can inspire startups and innovation for those of us in the United States?
Submarine cables, risky? No, come on, never. No, it's a very good question, because unfortunately in Europe, there has been reports of submarine cables having a problem, and thereby, especially the export cable, stopping production of the wind farm. Basically, survey work has to be paid attention to very, very carefully. Marine route surveys. Make sure the cable is buried correctly, not just on paper. Make sure it's buried correctly. And I think one of the most important for the developers and the operators is have in place before commissioning a emergency repair operation plan. Putting 230 kV or 275 kV under the ocean is inherently problematic. And if there is going to be a problem, make sure there is a repair plan that has passed muster with your insurance company, and make sure that is in place, ready to go. If you don't, which happened in Europe, it could be 4 to 6 months before the cable gets repaired. If you have a good repair plan in place, you could cut that down to 20 to 30 days. But survey, good burial, check it out, repair plan.
Just one thing from me, Tony, just as well as Bill's comments, is one What's been developed now is more intelligent cable monitoring. It's actually monitoring the cable, so actually predicting what the cable is doing. So you can do planned, perhaps more planned outages, for example, when you're doing outages of other things. So that is something that is starting to happen now in Europe, and I think that can be expanded and used in the US market as well. Because as Bill said, or didn't say but laughed, yeah, I mean, the cables are the biggest issue of a wind farm now. It's the cable and the cable failures, and what people are doing is now addressing that using intelligent cable monitoring.
Thanks so much. Amanda, did you just want to add anything, or?
Just very, very briefly, I can say I know that some of the states are, looking at ways, decoupling transmission with from the actual power. I don't know if that's a viable long-term solution. As wearing my policy kind of hat, I would say that what we're going to need is some type of federal guidance eventually to start going over where all these cables are. Certainly there's concerns about these spider webs of cables below and how you service them in the event that one that's buried under something else might break down at a certain time. So I think that is something that eventually the federal government will probably have to weigh in on, but I don't anticipate movement really quickly on that one.